Hello everyone, my name is Mette and I'm the founder of Disabled Students UK. Let me do a quick sensory description. I am a white person with short brown hair. My accent is a mix of Swedish, American and British, and I use all pronouns. I am so happy to see so many people here today to celebrate this launch and learn how we can use this new data on disabled students' experiences to improve accessibility in higher education. When we first founded DSUK, we postulated that the higher education sector needs 3 tools in order to be able to improve the experience of disabled students. It needed insight into the current disabled student experience. It needed a standard or measuring stick to measure this experience against. And it needed a way of holding itself accountable to this standard. I want to start today by looking at the first of these tools, insight. When disabled students are enabled to share their experiences of accessibility, universities' insights into the disabled student experience naturally improves. This in turn helps them to create accessible processes within the institution, and accessible processes further enable students to share their experiences, so this creates a virtuous cycle. Unfortunately, we have long known that the sector has an insights gap when it comes to disabled students. Through the years, the Institute for Employment Studies, Higher Education Commission, the Disabled Students Commission, and TASEL have all called for improved evaluation in this area. In 2021, when we asked disabled students what they most wanted their university to learn from the pandemic, the second most common thing they listed was for their university to listen to disabled students. Some of the starkest differences between disabled and non-disabled students on the National Student Survey regard whether students perceive that their voice is valued. With conventional routes being inaccessible, in 2021 we realized that we needed to build a way for disabled students' voices to be heard, systematically and in large numbers. And so we started building the annual Disabled Student Survey, a survey designed to map disabled students' experiences of university accessibility over a 10-year period, allowing us to find solutions and track progress over time. For 2 years, we worked on the design of the survey, building on the findings of previous reports. We collaborated with university accessibility staff and accessibility consultants. However, fundamentally, the survey was written by disabled students for disabled students, investigating issues and solutions only this group had experienced. What resulted was a survey with more than 116 questions, covering the full breadth of the disabled student experience. The Access Insights project developed around the annual Disabled Student Survey as a way of inviting sector stakeholders to join in. The largest disabled student-led project to date, it connects the sector with disabled students' insights and brings a data-driven approach to HE accessibility. Universities that disseminate the survey are able to see a free snapshot of their results on the Access Insights website, while universities that become members can receive a full report on their institution's results, allowing them to tailor their accessibility work to their specific institution. Access Insights membership has been recommended by the Disabled Students Commission, and in 2023, Disabled Students UK was crowned Change-Making Organisation of the Year in Disability Power 100 for our work on this project. I am incredibly proud to say that with 1,372 respondents from over 100 universities in its first year, the annual Disabled Student Survey is the largest survey into university accessibility to date, more than doubling the sample size of the influential report Arriving at Thriving by Policy Connect and the Higher Education Commission. This Disability History Month, we're proud to continue the historical disability movement slogan, "Nothing about us without us," by finally being able to provide a platform for these voices and paint a comprehensive picture of accessibility in the sector. And when I say I'm proud, I don't just mean that I'm proud of our team, although I very much am. I want to say that I'm proud of every single person who took the time and effort and offered vulnerability to fill in the survey. If you know anything about disabled students, you'll know that we're extremely strapped for time and we're a hard population to reach. And yet together, disabled students donated approximately 572 hours to filling in this survey, equivalent to 14 work weeks. The feedback from survey contributors confirms why. One respondent wrote, "Thank you so much for doing this survey. I've been too scared to complain or offer feedback to disability services or occupational health until I'm graduated and definitely don't need to rely on them anymore. But my experience has been terrible and I haven't really had anyone to share that with." Another student wrote, "It's nice to know that someone out there is collecting this information and cares." A third student, "Thanks for giving me a voice in some way." I'm incredibly thankful for every single student who shared the survey and for the people in this room, most of whom are university staff members, who did as well. When we reached out to you and we said we wanted to hear from your disabled students, you didn't shy away. You said, "We want to listen, we want this data." I couldn't fit all the universities that contributed to the survey on a page, but the universities on the left all shared the survey through their disabled student mailing list, which we quickly learned was the most effective way of reaching disabled students. If I've missed out your university, I do apologize. These were just the universities that told us about sharing the survey in this way. Finally, I'm incredibly thankful to a reliable sponsor, Snowden Trust, and our Access Insights members who are investing in improving the disabled student experience. Without you, this really wouldn't have been possible. So for me, this is a day of celebration. We did it. We've created a reliable baseline for the disabled student experience. Finally, disabled students' voices will have a platform. Now I say baseline because to us, this is just the beginning. Let me talk you through the Access Insights framework. As I mentioned when we started, the sector needs three tools: insight, a measuring stick, and a way of holding itself accountable. The Access Insights framework is designed to provide these tools. It's a 10-year project with the aim of finding and evaluating positive policies to significantly improve the disabled student experience by 2033. The 2023 results will serve as a baseline for the framework, and they're compared against a number of goals for 2033. By setting actionable targets on a 10-year timescale, we hope to provide a standard for the sector. The goals, which have been created in consultation with disability staff, take into consideration both the current state of the sector and that there are best practice examples available, enabling the sector to reach the goals within a 10-year period. The results and goals fall into 6 areas: anticipatory universal design, the inclusivity of the university culture, a barrier-free path to individualized support, ensuring students have sufficient and effective individualized adjustments, ensuring students feel that they have somewhere to turn with access issues, and equal non-academic opportunities. To focus in on the survey questions that relate most directly to university practices, policies, and structures, the report has a section called Structures Underlying Accessibility, which focuses on areas such as training, accountability, and leadership. This section facilitates conclusions about positive policies which may improve the disabled student experience. Each year, we also have a positive policies deep dive, where we focus on policies associated with positive student outcomes within a specific area of the report. This year, we're focusing on policies associated with students having sufficient adjustments. Together, the 2023 Disabled Student Experience Statistics, the 10-year goals, the structures underlying accessibility, and the positive policies create a framework allowing the sector to see where we are, where we want to go, and how to get there. As different institutions will face different challenges in improving the disabled student experience, the Access Insights project also shares a snapshot of the results of those universities with sufficient numbers of respondents. We're very happy to already be able to include 11 universities in the comparison this year, providing valuable information about the strengths and growth points for each institution. Next year, we're aiming to include 30 institutions, and ultimately our aim is to allow every single UK higher education provider to see a snapshot of their disabled students' experiences. Okay, so having discussed the Access Insights framework, let's look at some of our key results. So if you're here, you probably know that the situation for disabled students is not great. You've read the Arriving at Thriving report, you heard the lessons from the pandemic, you've probably seen that disabled students are the second most unhappy group in the National Student Survey. So I'm not going to go into the negative headlines. You're here because you want to improve things, so I want to show you how this data can help you do that. Let's talk about how we can ensure that by 2033, 75% of disabled students will have the support that they need. This year, our policy deep dive focuses on which policies may lead disabled students to receive all the reasonable adjustments that they need to be able to access their degree on equal terms with their non-disabled peers. So in order for students to be given sufficient adjustments, three things need to happen. They need to be informed enough to know what adjustments to ask for. They need to have the adjustments that they ask for agreed. And then they need to have the agreed adjustments implemented. And today, unfortunately, 16% of disabled students state that all three of these things happen. So let's see how we might be able to improve that. Currently, 45% of declared disabled students state that they've been given enough relevant information about different possible adjustments that could help them. This figure is especially low among second-generation British students whose parents migrated to the UK. By 2033, our goal is for this figure to be 75%. We found that the biggest predictor of students feeling that they had enough information was their disability advisor. Students who felt that their disability advisor was helpful and knowledgeable were 4.6 times more likely to have been sufficiently informed. However, resourcing of disability services was also important. In other words, whether disability services had adequate staff, funding, and training to effectively support students. Students who felt that disability staff had enough resources to do their job were 2.4 times more likely to be sufficiently informed. The fact that resourcing of disability services was important beyond whether the student had a good advisor indicates that the importance of disability services for dissemination of information goes beyond the communication between a student and their advisor. For instance, disability services can take measures such as displaying information about adjustments on the university website, making it accessible to students even before they declare a disability. Students who both felt that their disability advisor was helpful and that disability staff at their university had enough resources had an 89% likelihood of having been provided with enough information about different adjustments. Let's look at the approval of adjustments. So currently, 45% of students who declare a disability report that their university approved all the adjustments that they could to make the student's experience equal to the experience of a non-disabled student. This figure is somewhat lower among non-EU international students who tend not to receive DSA. We would like to see the percentage of disabled students that have all requested support approved increase to 75% by 2033. So let's look at which policies are associated with students having the support approved. The biggest predictors of having had all requested support approved was whether students had somewhere to turn to appeal a decision regarding accessibility. Students who felt that they did were 2.3 times less likely to have had a requested adjustment rejected. This could be someone within their department, someone within disability services, or even a complaints process that they could go through. Other important factors included whether the student estimated the disability staff had enough resources and which staff attitudes that they had encountered. Students who had encountered staff members who saw accessibility as a responsibility rather than a favor were 1.5 times more likely to have had all the support agreed, and students who had encountered the attitude that access needs can change were 1.7 times more likely to have had all their support agreed. According to our data, if students encountered these three factors, well-resourced disability staff, positive staff attitudes, and someone to turn to appeal, they had an 86% likelihood of having all their support approved. One university that did exceedingly well in this area was London South Bank University. In discussions with the university, we tried to understand why that might be, and we found that the university has a policy of not letting either waiting for DSA or waiting for diagnoses be a barrier to support approval. This is a strategy that seems to be working well for them in increasing the number of students with appropriate support. Let's look now at the implementation of adjustments. Currently, 36% of students who've had any support approved by their university have had all of that support put in place. This figure is particularly low among students from a low socioeconomic background. The biggest predictors of having support put in place relate to internal communication, staff training, and clear structures of responsibility. Students who reported that everyone who needed to be informed about their adjustments had been quickly informed were 4.6 times more likely to have the support implemented. Students who reported that staff members who did not have disability as their primary job were knowledgeable about how to implement adjustments were 3 times more likely to have had the support implemented. Students who felt that staff members prioritized their well-being were 3.4 times more likely to have had their support implemented. One university with very good implementation results is Leicester, and perhaps it's no coincidence that this university has among the best staff attitudes results as well. Finally, students who did not feel that they were pushed from person to person were 2.9 times more likely to have had their support implemented. For those students for whom all of these factors were true, they had an 82% chance of having had all agreed support put in place. Now, I hope that this deep dive, although there's a lot of numbers here, but I hope that it helps for university to provide students with sufficient adjustments. But I would like to end my presentation today where I started, with the disabled student voice. Our survey shows that those who felt that their institution listened to the disabled student voice were 3 times more likely to have the support that they needed. But what exactly does it mean to listen to the disabled student voice? Let's look at a few examples, starting with one that we've just talked about actually, the implementation of support. Students who had someone check in with them proactively about whether the support that had been agreed for them was actually implemented were 60% more likely to have had all support implemented in the end. This shows the importance of proactive listening. Another important practice is listening when students do raise issues. The vast majority of disabled students do encounter access issues after starting at university, and unfortunately half of students who have raised access issues have never had one resolved, indicating that they're not being heard or taken seriously. However, interestingly, students who at some point have been told to escalate an unresolved issue were more likely to have had their issues resolved. In fact, they were 40% more likely to have had an issue resolved quickly. This indicates that there's something about having an escalation route which makes it more likely for students to be heard. Finally, let's look at surveys. Students who have been asked about accessibility in a survey or form in the last year were 24% more likely to have the support that they needed. However, students who felt that their institution had acted on this survey were twice as likely to have that support. So before we go on to the panel, let's talk through a few concrete steps that your university can take. First of all, we encourage you to disseminate the 2024 Annual Disabled Student Survey when it's time to do so early in the new year. Universities that disseminate the survey to their disabled student mailing list are more likely to achieve high enough response numbers to access a free snapshot of their institution's specific results. Secondly, we encourage your university to become an Access Insights member. Member universities support our work and in return gain premium access to disabled students' insights through institution-specific survey results, briefs, events, and consulting. The data from this survey is incredibly rich, and the analysis presented today only scratches the surface of all the insight it offers to improving the disabled student experience. In the coming months, we will be holding events focusing on specific disabled student groups, as well as specific areas of the disabled student experience, such as offering equal access to disabled PhD students and unpacking disclosure. Access Insights members are able to access these events at a discounted rate. However, the key advantage of membership is the institution-specific insight it offers. Platinum members receive a report using a color code system to compare the university's results from the annual disabled student survey, both to the UK average and to the 2033 goals. The report provided to Diamond members additionally includes the qualitative data from the survey, policy analysis, and key improvement recommendations. These reports contain everything you need to be able to create a plan for reaching the 2033 goals. You read more about what is included in these packages, along with user reviews on our website. There's a 25% discount on the packages until the launch of the 2024 survey. If you want to learn more, please do fill in the form at the end of the event and email us at accessinsights@disabledstudents.co.uk. Thank you.
Yes, hello. I'll just do a quick visual description for anyone that needs it. My name is Amelia McLaughlin. I'm the Network Director here at DSUK. I'm a deathly white individual who is currently wearing a cream jumper and wearing what is technically blue and pink glasses and some red lipstick. You might see that my glasses are quite dark, so it might appear to you that they're actually black frames rather than different colours. So I will move on to our panellists. So we are going to introduce each one of our panellists, and then they are going to just give a few minutes of what their kind of main takeaways are from the report following their introduction. Just to answer the question, yes, they will be on the screen momentarily. We're just gonna let them come on in a minute. Actually, I can probably start showing their screens. Thank you, Jim. Some of our panelists aren't coming on till after the break, so they will be visible if they wish to be at that point. But just to introduce them very quickly, I'm going to start. Sorry, let me just get my notes up. That has decided to go away. So first of all, we're going to introduce Helen Sandsminder, Chief Executive of the Snowdon Trust, which is a charity that provides grants and scholarships in order to break down the barriers that disabled students face in education. Thank you for being our first speaker today, and I will pass over to you for your key takeaways on the report.
Thanks, Amelia. Hi, everyone. I'm Helen Salensminder. I'm a white woman with curly shoulder-length hair and big glasses. And yes, as Amelia said, I'm the Chief Executive of the Snowdon Trust. And yes, we exist to deliver programmes that drive inclusion for disabled students. And the primary way we do that is through financial awards. And we believe fundamentally that disabled students have a really crucial voice in driving accessible practice. And that's why we were really keen to provide funding to support the development of the research. And I think for me, the key takeaways are, first, congratulations to DSUK. I think this is the largest group of disabled students that any piece of research has brought together. And so we have to listen to that. And what I really like about this research is that it's been used to create a report which is really highly constructive and collaborative. And it gives me real confidence that we're all in this together. And I hope that everyone here is thinking about taking those 10-year goals seriously. But the glaring takeaway for me has to be the stat that only 37% of disabled students who are promised reasonable adjustments are getting them put in place. And let's not forget, those are adjustments that universities have legal obligation to provide. So it's really hard to view that as anything other than a staggering failing. And I think what this research and every piece of research I've read in the last 3 years tells me is that for change to be meaningful, it really needs to be driven at leadership level. Now, obviously, I'm on the outside, so it's very easy for me to waft in with my key takeaways. But I think for university leaders, it strikes me that, you know, it's clear that your disability support services are under-resourced and overstretched, and that communication between departments is poor and seems to lack any accountability. And I suppose it occurs to me that in lots of instances that's thought to be a resource issue. But I'd be looking carefully at that, because I think that inefficiency probably costs your bottom line more and not less in the long run. But worse than that, it's costing me, because actually the Snowdon Trust grant programme is there as a last resort piece of funding, and we are overwhelmed by demand. Currently, we're having to say no to 2 in every 3 applicants because we just don't have enough money to support everyone who applies to us. But actually, lots of the things that they're asking for should be being provided by their university. And so for me, that means that we're all failing disabled students, and I feel pretty disappointed about that. But I think the other takeaway is, you know, let's be realistic. I don't think anyone underestimates the challenge of implementing systemic change in institutions of this size. And actually, I have huge sympathy for the disability teams who are really doing the best they can in difficult circumstances. So I was thinking what I would do in that situation. And I think the key takeaways there for me are really, you know, share good practice with colleagues, look at the universities that seem to be getting at least some of this right and see what you can learn from them. And I think the first thing I'd be trying to do if I was running a disability unit would be to try and set up an appeal process for accessibility decisions, because the research is demonstrating that it's effective for students. It shows unequivocally that you're taking their needs seriously. But more than that, if you're doing it right, it's escalating visibility up through the leadership chain, which can only help to drive accountability. That's it from me for now.
Thank you so much, Helen, for that really impactful first statement. Next, I'm going to introduce Yasmin Afifi. Yaz is an experienced student leader, having held the chair of the Disability and Mental Health Students Association at the University of Birmingham, and has lived experience with a specialism in the area of assistance dogs. So I will hand over to them.
Hi everyone, I'm Yaz. My pronouns are she, they, and like Leah said, I am a disabled student at the University of Birmingham. I am currently in my final year of studying modern languages, and I also have an assistance dog, so apologies in advance if you see any dog noises. A brief description of me: I am a mixed ethnicity person with brown curly hair. And I have a Southern English / London accent. And yeah, as Leah said, I am a disabled student at the University of Birmingham. I have been the chair of my university's Disability Association, and I am also a trained accessibility consultant through DSA at DSUK. Sorry. And yeah, so my key takeaways from this report are that really an anticipatory approach needs to be taken by universities, such as things like universal design and inclusive design, as well as the importance of the student voice being heard and being listened to by universities. And to quote one student from the survey, they said, thanks for giving me a voice in some way. And it really shows that disabled students really appreciate having their voices heard and being listened to by universities, because it truly does make a difference to us in the wider university community in being able to access our courses. Ways that universities can improve this, I've seen personally, have been doing things such as contribution groups and panels. it really gives us the opportunity as students to be able to voice our concerns and, make recommendations to universities on ways that they can resolve issues as well. And it's, in general, it's when these things are adhered to and when they are passed on in a coherent and accessible way, they really do make a difference in terms of our experience at university. Basically making these panels and groups as productive as possible really does help us participate like our non-disabled peers. And truly, I think that benefits pretty much everyone in the university community, because we aren't here, for free. We aren't, on a scholarship for any reason. So I think it's really important that disabled students are definitely treated as equals in the university community in general. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Yaz. I'm going to move on to our next panelist, Jim Dickinson, who has extensive experience within the NUS and student unions more widely, and who is an associate editor at Wonkhe, taking particular interest in the student experience, university governance, and regulation. And I will pass on to you, Jim.
Afternoon, folks. Great to be here. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a white man with very short hair, glasses, a hoodie, and I'm 49 today. So happy birthday to me. I think in many ways, the 36% of students who say that the adjustments that have been agreed are actually put in place is the sort of stat that ought to shame the sector. And shame, I think, is a kind of really interesting concept. But in some ways, we've heard a version of this stat so many times before that I think over time, that feeling has become numb. And for whatever reason, shame isn't working. And I guess one of the questions I've therefore always got when I see stats like that is, well, what would work? If I was a regulator, what would I do? If I was a university senior manager, what would I do? If I was a regulator and I was taking this issue seriously, I think one of the things I would be looking for at strategic level would be evidence that individual incidences of reasonable adjustments were being totted up, calculated, and then converted into strategy. That would be evidence of meeting the anticipatory duty. And so if that's not happening, I think that would be the first question I'd ask. The second, I think, is, do students have access to professional advocacy within departments where they're in these sorts of discussions? It seems to me that a part-time disabled students officer in the Students' Union isn't professional advocacy to help with this. And it seems to me that often centrally run disability services functions either lack the capacity or the formal influence to be able to both support students who are battling to get these adjustments met. And so that's another question I would ask. I'd also be asking whether or not disabled students were being regularly surveyed on their experience, whether they, for example, were participating in the Disabled Students UK work. And I would also be asking about the extent to which a university was proactively making students aware of their rights. It's easy, I think, for those of us that have been involved in this stuff for a long time to understand concepts like reasonable adjustments and so on. But students don't necessarily understand those concepts. And the first step to enforcing a right is knowing that you have one. But most importantly, I want to talk about what happened to me yesterday when I had lunch with Mark and Debbie, who are the two people that run Wonkhe. So I went to North London, I had lunch, we ordered our food, and 5 minutes after the food had arrived, someone came to the table and said, "Can I just check, is everything okay with your food?" Now, anyone that has been engaged in formatted dining over the past 22 years will be familiar with that fairly routine check-in to make sure that everything's okay with your food. You might not know where that comes from, and it actually comes from an incredibly influential piece of research from the US, which found that when people don't get their order, when they make an order for food, often they don't raise it as a concern at the time because they don't like conflict and they don't want to put the member of staff under pressure. Instead, they grumble about it later and perhaps don't go back to the restaurant or then post a bad review online. And I think that's a really, really interesting concept because the confidence that students have to cause trouble is significantly lower than your average diner in formatted dining. And the chances of something going wrong, according to these stats, is significantly worse for a student when a plan has been put in place. And so I guess the question I would ask as a regulator would be, if you are going to agree a plan with a student, what are the circumstances under which you are not putting in place a programme to regularly check whether the plan is being met? And if it's not being met, then sending people in to go and sort it out. The reliance on individual students to identify that the plan isn't being met and to then battle their way through to get it met, I just think is unacceptable. Restaurants wouldn't treat diners like that, and I don't think universities should treat students like that. But the final thing I want to say is about regulation. The Office for Students, perhaps necessarily in its regulation in England, focuses on principally gaps between different groups in getting into university, gaps between students doing well at university, and then gaps in employment outcomes. And that makes lots of sense. But I have a view on this, which is, imagine that at the university we might be thinking about, whichever university we might be talking about, disabled students do better on access than average, better on average on firsts and 2-1s or other degree outcomes, and actually do better in the labour market. It still wouldn't make it okay for their reasonable adjustments to not be met. And, you know, the reality is this is a legal minimum. The fact that the Office for Students says out loud that its regulatory approach is that where social and policy objectives won't be delivered by market competition mechanisms, and that therefore OFS will take direct regulatory action to drive improvement in this area, that's a good thing in principle, but what it's not doing on experience rather than outcomes is delivering that in practice. And to the extent to which anyone from the Office for Students might by accident either be on this webinar or be watching a recording, I think I would say there are only so many surveys, annual reports and research studies that disabled students can put up with before the Office for Students starts to require the kind of sensible strategic level of activity that I've just discussed of all the providers that are registered with it. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Jim. I just wanted to go to Deborah, our last but not least panellist. So Deborah is the Deputy Vice-Chancellor at London South Bank University. Her academic work has focused on inequality and poverty, but she has a passion about the power of education to change people's opportunities in life, and she currently holds the overall responsibility for education at LSBU. Again, thank you for joining us, and I will pass over to you for our final key thoughts.
Thank you, Leah. So I'm Deborah. A quick visual description. I'm a white presenting woman with long white hair. My pronouns are she and her, and I give an affirmative statement when I talk to large groups. I do have a stammer, I will get stuck on words, and we will all be fine. So I wanted to talk about my key takeaways from the report, and particularly to thank the panel for asking me to thank the organisers for asking me to be part of the panel, because this is very much a watershed moment. One of the roles that I have, and it's a key role, is as the National Chair for the Disabled Student Commitment Advisory Group. And that's a group which is supporting universities to sign up to the Disabled Student Commitment. So I want to say a bit about that commitment and what it makes me reflect on when I look at the results of the survey today. So the Disabled Student Commitment was published in April 2023, and it was based on the voices and the evidence from disabled students, from disability service leads, from universities and from other sector bodies, and very much based on best practice that came out of other reports. I think of it as, you know, really as really standing on the shoulders of that pre-existing excellent work that's been done to talk about the issues that disabled students face. The commitment has got 43 principles in it, and when I listened to today's report, there are three in particular. There were three areas of commitment in particular that stood out for me. And the first is that commitment to co-production. So a key thing that we ask universities to do if they sign up to the Disabled Student Commitment is to seize opportunities like today's. So that is to actively engage in the National Disabled Student Survey, to sign up to exercises like Access Insights, and to develop ways to support disabled student voice within their institutions. And that comes out very clearly from the work today, that very clear finding that disabled students feel unheard, unlistened to, unvalued within universities. And that work around creating spaces for voice and creating ways to support the power of disabled student voices is key to develop that advocacy. My second takeaway is the importance of a whole institution approach, a student life cycle approach. And that's because of the need for an anticipatory approach and for early partnership working. But more than that, it's about dealing with the unevenness of experience that disabled students report, and particularly the lack of awareness and understanding, the lack of a person to talk to, that was widely reported. And thirdly and finally, a key finding for me, a key takeaway from today's report, is the need for a sector-wide approach. So while we're particularly talking about the responsibilities of universities here, there are important actions that we need from others that are active in the sector, including UCAS, including the Student Loan Company, and importantly, looking at professional, statutory and regulatory bodies that often determine the content of particular degrees. And on this last point, for me, there's a key issue about the vision that we have as a sector. So not just who are the people that are part of the university, both as students and staff, but what our vision is for the accessibility of our disciplines and our courses. And that's an issue that runs at the heart of some of the barriers that are reported today, and an issue that we need to work on as a sector as a whole. Thank you, Leah.
And thank you, Deborah, for that brilliant introduction and takeaway. We go to our Q&A section, and in this, we have a formatted question that we're going to start with, and then if we have time, we'll get to some of your submitted questions. So to go to our question, how would you like to see the sector approach accessibility in the goal year of 2033? And with that, I will go to maybe Promit first in terms of the data that maybe you can offer for that.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether people can see me on the screen or not, but hi everyone. My name is Promit. I use the pronouns he, him. I have brown skin, black hair, and I'm wearing a grey shirt. I won't go over the stats in painstaking detail because it is all there in the report. But I just want to highlight, as Deborah mentioned in her opening remarks, that we hope that this will be a watershed moment. Today's report marks an important milestone, I think, in making progress in filling the much needed gap that exists in the evidence of disabled students' experiences. And it brings together the views of disabled students in such unprecedented numbers, sharing with us their wisdom in identifying the key issues. And that's very much in line with DSUK's values of, prioritizing this lived experience and what experts have to say on this. But the report and the way that it's structured goes way beyond that, because we want to be constructive in this dialogue. Beyond problem identification, today's report sets out some concrete steps that universities and other stakeholders can take in meeting the 2033 goals. It's our chance to seize this moment and be ambitious in where we want to be in 10 years' time. But in order to do that, I think there are a few things that other panelists have mentioned that the data shows is sort of cross-correlated with very positive outcomes. Primarily, universities taking an anticipatory approach. Where these policies are put in place in the first instance, there are much fewer cases that will be necessary where intervention is necessary. And that will benefit both students and staff. And really, I'd like to encourage shifting the conversation to not seeing accessibility as necessarily an antagonistic relationship between universities and student groups or oversight bodies, but trying insofar as we can to align our incentives, sort of thinking a bit more win-win. But in order to do that, we need to be mindful of the data. We have a duty towards transparency in the data, and it only works if this information is easily accessible, because without that we have information asymmetries, where we have the wrong kinds of incentives. Instead, we would very much like to bring this data out into the open and work constructively and collaboratively with all of our partners. And my final thought on all of this is that there are considerable spillover effects. Not only is improvement in one area of the 6 areas that we've identified in the report correlated sort of with the others as well, but ultimately making progress towards these will be better for all students, not just disabled students, and it will be conducive to a better culture all across the sector. So thanks very much for all of those in attendance. It's great to see a great turnout. Again, very happy to take questions on the survey or the data itself, but I'll hand over back to Leah for the other questions.
Thank you for that, Promit. So I think, considering your comments, the next logical person on our panel that I think would be good to answer the same question would be Helen. Just in terms of running order, I'm going to go Helen, Yaz, Deborah, and then Jim, if that's okay with the panelists. So I'll let Helen in first.
Thanks, Leah. Gosh, in terms of what things would look like in 10 years, I would hope, is it too unrealistic to think that we might not even be talking about accessibility anymore, because we might just be thinking about our university students as the giving them the sort of customer service that they deserve, and every student just being given the right introduction to get the right support that they need. That's what I'm working towards.
Thank you for that, and I don't think we could agree any more than that, Helen. If I could go on to Yaz for a student perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely, I think in 10 years' time, I totally agree with Helen. I really hope that we wouldn't even need to be talking about accessibility, and that policies would be designed so universally that, to the point that we wouldn't even have to distinguish between disabled students and non-disabled students to a certain extent. But yeah, definitely, if universities are able to follow the recommendations that are laid out in the report, as well as other reports that have been written by DSUK and Access Insights, it would be incredible. Yeah, that's just, yeah. Thank you.
Yes. Going over next to Deborah.
Thanks, Leah. So I've got two elements to my vision for 2033. One is that universities and the sector will have finally ditched the idea that there is a single typical student, and that's never been true, and it's certainly not true now. And the results of reports like this and others show that that's not the case. So it's seeing each student as they are, what they come with, and what it is they think that they need. I think the second part of it is related, which is understanding how we envisage our subjects and our and the professions people go into after them. So, you know, who is it that, you know, can't be a geographer? Who is it that can't be a speech and language therapist? Who is it that can't be a doctor? When we go and look at some of the challenges that disabled students and others face when they're studying particular subjects and courses, it's about inbuilt bias. And so in 2033, I'd like us to have that clarity as a society about how we see the, you know, the value of education and what we think of when we think of people using education in their future lives.
Absolutely, thank you for that, Deborah. And last but by no means least, Jim.
Look, I think in many ways, the reasonable adjustments delivery thing isn't something that, I mean, I actually think, Leah, the targets that you've got for reasonable adjustments being consistently met are very, very modest. They're legal requirements. They should be met tomorrow. And I guess one of the things that, where in terms of the future I'd like to see, is actually a separation, not that it's very easy to do in practice, but a separation between that which we know to be basic legal requirements and the stuff that's more complicated. So, you know, for example, all of the reasonable adjustments can be in place, and I still think we'd have a belonging problem, because I still think there's all sorts of work to be done with other students and with the way that we support access in social activity and student union activity and so on. There's all sorts of stuff to be done on pedagogy that might not meet the tests for a basic legal requirement, but are really, really important. And so I guess for me, the basic legal requirements have got to be met tomorrow. And if they're not being met, it's a duty on the university senior leaders and or regulators to get that fixed now. And that should then allow us 4, 5, 6, however long years to work on those harder ones, which are about integration, attitude change, belonging, and full participation, both in educational communities and society. But separating the two so that all of the feedback on access doesn't just go into the nice to have quality assurance basket, I think is the really important step universities have to take.
Brilliant, thank you, Jim. And just getting our final question up. To all panelists, how can public comparison shape progress towards disabled students' equal access? And I will go in order of Yaz, if that's okay, then Deborah, then Jim, then Helen, if that is okay. Promise, if we have time, I will come to you on that one, but I know that's slightly out of your area. So yeah, if we could start with Yaz, that would be fab.
Absolutely. I think public comparison really does help hold institutions accountable for improving access for disabled students. It's also a really, really good resource for prospective students and current students to have in order to make decisions on where they want to go to university, where they might want to go for, a postgrad degree, etc. And also in general, it helps with the transparency of just, having these statistics out there and for people to really make informed decisions on their education.
Brilliant, thank you, Yaz. And this is kind of the whole point of why we did it in this way. So thank you for reinforcing that. Deborah, you're next on this question.
So actually, it's hard for me to say it better than Yaz has done, absolutely, around accountability. And there is an element of naming and shaming. And I think that's important to say. That's part of the part of what we need to make change, unfortunately. But there is also that element of sharing of best practice and understanding that deeper piece of understanding. Why is it that in some places disabled students are reporting a much better experience? And I think in the way we've begun to do in today's presentation, to really understand what the drivers of that is. And so that's a really important piece about that publicly published work.
Absolutely, thank you. Going next, just conscious of time, to Jim to answer that question.
Suddenly scrabbling to switch on my camera and mic. Two things really briefly. I mean, the level of detail on, the kind of different aspects of what can go wrong, I think is, really important in your report today. But one thing that I would say is that if I was in the Netherlands today, as well as a extraordinarily similar national student survey that they have, one of the questions in that survey asks a student if they are disabled or have a long-term health condition, and then asks if any reasonable adjustments have been agreed, and then asks if they've been met. And you can't pile in the level of detail that you have in your survey into that kind of exercise. But the fact that it's not in the National Student Survey, I think, is a huge weakness. But one other thing I wanted to say, all of the political focus from government over the past 2 years in England has been on freedom of speech. And in the government's mind, that's all about right-wing views and cancel culture and so on. But both in OFS's data and in our data, we know that disabled students are significantly less likely to feel confident to speak their mind, speak in public, and so on. There are some really important things going on there in relation to confidence and integration. And I guess one of the other things I think is really important is that, as well as the obvious stuff that's about disability and disabled students, that wherever there are differences for disabled students on all of the other questions, including freedom of speech, that they're interrogated properly in order to achieve some of the wider goals that we've talked about today.
Brilliant, thank you, Jim. And last but not least, Helen, if you would like to comment.
Well, there's little to follow all of that with, obviously, because it's clear to all of us that this is a good thing. I think the only thing I would add is, having read through the report, I can remember the 2 or 3 universities that came out top, but I didn't take any real notice of the ones that came out at the bottom. So in that sense, I think this is a really positive opportunity.
Thank you so much again to all of our panelists. I'm going to wrap up super quickly, as people do need to leave at 2 o'clock. Please do fill in our feedback survey if you've attended today. If you are watching this later, thank you for spending time to watch the recording. Sadly, you couldn't participate as much as if you were here, but hopefully that is still really useful information. Again, if you want any information about us as an organisation, or the consultancy, Access Insights, or the things we offer, please do give us a email at contact@disabledstudents.co.uk. And thank you again, everyone, and hope you have a good rest of the day.